Hello everybody and welcome to this week's Motor Trade Radio podcast, brought to you in association with eBay Motors Group. It is Saturday the 2nd of October and you're joined by myself, Philip Nothard.
And me, Curtis Hutchinson. This is episode 51, season 7 of Motor Trade Radio, bringing you all the chatter that matters. And once again, we've gathered together this week's big car retailing stories across the franchise and independent sectors for you to enjoy all in one place, on demand, on your podcast feed.
Well, that was September, come and go.
Yeah.
We'll have a chat in a bit about that, but we'll be eagerly waiting to see where the biggest month of the year has finished up, hasn't it? But that's coming on.
We will know next week, won't we? We should have the new car figures to talk about, new cars and vans. So, And
we're on the final quarter of the year. We won't mention how many days till Christmas, so I will keep away from that one. Although I am starting to see a lot more countdowns now to Christmas Day and freezing turkeys now and things like that because of the shortages. I
was going to say, if you can get hold of one.
Is that what it's like? Is it? Oh dear.
Yeah.
Petrol or diesel or your turkey for Christmas, but we'll get there. But we have got some shouts outs this week, so if you haven't caught it, then I would suggest definitely looking back to the fantastic midweek interview we did with Darren Martin from CAP HPI, and he was giving his view on the whole month of September in terms of the latest, in terms of value movements, and we did sort of chat to him for quite a while on his view on the market and what he's expecting for the remainder of the year.
Yeah, it's a fascinating insight because, as you say, he looks at September, but he looks ahead as well. So do catch the full interview, but we will have an extract later on in today's show.
Definitely. And we're also joined on today's show by Steve Whitten from Enable Moments, and he's going to be talking to us about the latest in terms of I think it was in Inclusivity Week that we've just come through, in National Inclusion Week, and he's going to be chatting about what that means to our sector and the correlation between inclusion and mental health, and what some of the retailers and the industry should be thinking about now that we've come out of furlough and we're into the final quarter of this year.
And we've got another exclusive. This is from eBay Motors Group, and they've given us first sight of their September market view. So that's looking at used car trends across the franchise, independent and car supermarket sectors, and that's ahead of it hitting the press from Monday. So you can expect to see a few headlines next week on that, but we'll have a sneak preview of that.
But in between the chat with Steve, and we're going to include a clip from the interview with Darren, we've managed to get a few headlines as well, haven't we, Curtis?
We have indeed, yeah, and the headlines keep breaking because the first story that I'll mention in a moment only landed this morning, and that is Big Motoring World Group snaps up SW Car Supermarket. Staying with used cars, Pendragon to relaunch car store used car operation as Zendcar. Prestige car buyers are most likely to find dealers through brand websites, finds Judge Service. Sytner posts dramatically increased pre-tax profits of £100 million for 2020. And the headlines there are from AM, Motor Trader and Car Dealer. But first of all, we'll start with our exclusive from eBay Motors Group. So this, as I say, is their market view for September. And I guess the headline here is around the price trends, which again is something that Darren will touch on later on, looking at the wholesale sector. But eBay Motors Group, average used car prices rise £822 in September, as the Ford Focus values increased 21% year on year. Yes, that's 21% year on year. So these stats are absolutely amazing. So September saw the average advertised price of used cars jump by £822. And the average list price of the top 50 makes and models advertised on motors.co.uk increased by 6.5% to £13,504, and that's up from £12,682 in August. Now, the biggest increases were actually recorded in the franchise sector, which was up 7.7% to £16,243, followed by car supermarkets, which saw averages rise 6.8% up to £14,881, whilst independents saw an increase of 5.8%. So that was up to £9,331. And just going back to that Ford Focus, because what eBay Motors Group have done is they've looked at some of the most popular 3-year 30,000 mark, and the Ford Focus saw a price rise of 4.4% month on month to £17,250, which was up £2,840 odd pounds. But the increase since January was 21% year on year, which is just absolutely astonishing for the Ford Focus, which, as we know, is sort of one of the most popular new and used cars in the country.
Yeah, definitely. And interesting. I mean, looking at the stats around sort of stock volume per dealership and average days to sell. Not a massive movement between August and September of this year, but you put the comparison to September of last year. So the average volume per dealership is 36.9, and that's marginally down from August of that we saw 38.3, but actually significantly down compared to last year that the figure was at 46.5. Now, if you start to look at that from a franchise, independent and supermarket perspective, franchise look like they've seen the most loss compared to last year, that they were at 54, down to 46.9 in August, and then down to 46.5 in September. Independents dropped down from 35.1 in September of last year, down to 28.8 in August of this year, and then down to 27.8 in September of this year. But the supermarkets, interestingly, are 254 in September of last year. They rose to 258 in August of this year, and then dropped down again in September, down to 243. But actually, the days to sell do actually reflect that, which the interesting one out of these is we have actually seen a slight rise in days to sell since August of this year. So the average days to sell are at 35.4 for September. They're slightly up from August of this year, that were 34.6, but obviously down from September of last year, that it was 36.5. Now, franchise dealers are running at 30.6 in September, but that's up from 29.5 in August. Independents are marginally up to 44.7 days from 44.1 of August of this year. But interestingly, the supermarkets have reduced their days to sell and gone down to 24.2 days, and that's down from 26.2 that they saw in August of this year. So some interesting stats there, sort of moving around when you start to break it down by dealer type, Curtis.
Yeah, definitely. And looking at the fastest selling cars of the month, really, the top 10 is dominated by SUVs. Once again, we've seen this now for quite a few months in a row. So I'll just take you through the top 5, because we've got a joint number 4, Vauxhall Mokka, 23.9 days, along with the Mercedes-Benz A-Class at 23.9 days. Third fastest selling was the Kia Sorento at 21.9 days. Second place was the MG ZS at 21.8 days. And the fastest selling car of the month was the Ford Edge at just 20 days. So under. And before we move on from this, eBay Motors Group did actually share some stats with me, which I know they'll be releasing next week, and that's looking at the strength of EV views during that final week of the month. And you alluded to it earlier with the problems we've got with distribution of petrol and diesel to forecourts. That's generated a lot of interest in EVs and hybrids online.
Yeah, so like you say, I think there's a lot of activity in the last sort of week, 10 days of September, wasn't it? As obviously that news broke, and obviously the Nationals jumped all over it and created that panic buying around the forecourts of the petrol stations there. But interestingly, they've done that analysis and seen that activity rise in terms of that alternative fuel and EV sector. Has that happened?
Yeah, and that's something that will be shared during the week, so do look out for that.
And so this data, there's a lot of data. It's always a good overview of the sector within this market view from eBay Motors. So, as Curtis said, available from Monday onwards. So we've only covered a high level of what's available in that, and they do break down a lot more analysis around the stock, the best sellers, and look at it by fuel type as well. So I do urge you to head over there to eBay Motors and have a look at that data. It might just give you a little bit of insight as to what's happening in the sector.
So, first headline this week is from Car Dealer, and the headline is Big Motoring World Group snaps up used car dealer SW Car Supermarket. So it kind of says it all in the headline there. Big Motoring World, we've been looking at them on a regular basis now for the last couple of years, because they have been expanding. They've obviously launched Carzam last year as well, their digital service, but this sees them acquiring SW Car Supermarket, who are based in Peterborough. They've got 2 sites there, and they're run by founder Anton Khan. Now, I'd urge anyone listening to head over to the Car Dealer website, because there's actually a really good interview with Peter Waddell, the owner and founder of Big Motoring World, Anton Khan, and James Baggett from Car Dealer, who's interviewing them to find out how this deal happened. And it is an interesting one, because Big Motoring World has acquired SW Car Supermarket, but Anton Khan will become the COO of this new expanded group, and he will eventually become CEO as Peter Waddell becomes chairman. They don't say when that will happen, but that will happen at some time in the future. So quite an interesting strategic development here, because it doesn't just stop with Peterborough, because the two of them are talking about expanding this new group into Derby, Leeds, Birmingham, and into Glasgow, which is Peter Waddell's hometown. So he's obviously keen to get representation up there. So it's really taking Big Motoring World out of the southeast and turning it into a national brand.
Yeah, definitely. And there's not much to add to that. I think many people have been sort of wondering what has been happening with Big Motoring World, as we've seen some of the other sort of supermarkets and disruptors grow and look at investment and growth plans. But he's obviously been up to this behind the scenes, and like you say, he's alluded to the fact that he isn't just stopping there with his Peterborough growth, but actually, as you say there, you cited the other locations and looking at that significant footprint across the UK market there. So again, he's not standing back, is he? I think he is obviously moving pretty quickly in terms of that growth plan.
Yeah, exactly. And they do actually reveal how this deal started, which is a little while ago when Peter and Anton met on LinkedIn.
Right.
So it all started from there, and they got talking. Obviously, started talking face to face, probably virtually at the time, and it all stems from them. And you can tell that Peter is very enthusiastic about working with Anton. Anton Khan, he's a young guy, mid 30s. He set up SW Car Supermarkets in 2010 and opened the second site in 2018. So both sites are serving Peterborough and into East Anglia, and they've grown significantly. And it's actually Anton that will be looking after the branding for this newly expanded business, because the two SW sites are being refurbed at the moment and will reopen with the new branding. So interesting developments here, and a lot more to see.
Definitely. And staying with used cars, and we did mention Bill Berman last week on the podcast, and straight out of that, they've now relaunched. Or they've I think it is a relaunch, isn't it? I mean, it's a fresh used car proposition, so
yeah.
we've got to be careful. It's not necessarily a relaunch of Car Store. But Pendragon to relaunch used car sales operation Zencar. So this was after was it last year, the year before, that the Car Store was slowed down, and we saw that drop off with Car Store. But they've now come up with this.
Yeah, because I was at Motor Trader when Car Store was launched, and it's probably 5, 6 years ago, something like that, by Trevor Finn, who was the chief exec at the time. And they had ambitious plans for Car Store, opening up a number of sites across the country. It never really took off. The branding didn't quite work. They never had the volume coming through. And certainly since Bill Berman took over at Pendragon, that whole part of the business has been under review. And as you said, it will be relaunched as Zencar. I quite like the name.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many new names kicking around at the moment that aren't very good. But Zencar, it seems to do the job.
And at least it doesn't start with a C. It could have been worse.
Yes.
It could have had another K to start off with. But no, it's good to be a bit different.
At least they didn't go for Car Zen.
Yes,
which they could have done.
Yeah, definitely.
So the plan is to launch it in late Q4 with the rollout over the course of next year. And I think hats off to AM here, because I think they unearthed the story. I don't think it was actually released by Pendragon, although they have got Bill to comment on what his plans are. He's not saying very much, but he is saying it's a digital first business. So this will be their online used car retailing platform.
Yeah, I think if you look back to year before last, when their strategic announcement came out, that they were looking at where their growth areas were, and obviously when we talked about Bill last week, that AutoNation background that he had over in the US, you could probably put a bet on that he was going to do something significant around that used car proposition for Pendragon, and see where that was a growth area. So it'd be good to watch this happen and see what his experience from AutoNation that he brings over to the UK with Pendragon, and watch that grow, because he's certainly got the experience of running a significantly large used car operation, hasn't he?
Yes, and with all the talk at the moment about digital and used car, it's his timing is spot on. But it does mean there'll be another major player looking for stock.
Yes, definitely. That teases up quite nicely to the next stage here.
Yeah, so staying with this week's big used car stories, here's an extract from our exclusive podcast chat with CAP HPI's Darren Martin, with Darren talking about the continued strength of used car values, which increased by 5.9% in September. So that was the 7th monthly rise in a row, and 26.3% up since March. So we're seeing some astonishing figures here. So over to Darren.
Yeah, hi guys. Yeah, without a doubt, it took us by surprise, the value movements during September. We've ended up 5.9%, an increase of 5.9% during the month, which is obviously a high. It's the second highest monthly movement in percentage terms, but it's actually the highest movement we've ever had in pound note terms because values have gone up over the last few months. The previous month was £825, the previous highest, sorry, in May for June, but September for October is £860. So it's that's at 3 years 60. So that during a single month of increases, it's blown us away again, really, on just how strong it's been. It's really, really ramped up again this month.
I mean, we do use the word unprecedented quite a bit, during these monthly chats. But I mean, that's an incredible rise, as you point out, in pound note terms. So some great insight as ever from Darren there, Phil. And I'm just wondering, what are you seeing in terms of trends in the used market? I know you with your Cox hats on track it very, very closely.
Yeah. I mean, at the minute we're seeing continual strength in that used car conversion at the auctions there. So first time conversion is into the 90% now. Which is the highest I've seen for some time, and I've just been looking at some of the numbers for September, and you're looking at a first-time conversion of just over 91%. Bearing in mind last September that was down at 84%, and even pre-pandemic, those figures were in the sort of late 70s, maybe early 80s. So you can see where that supply and demand imbalance is. Cap clean performance is again well into the 100% now, so I've run it sort of in excess of 103% compared to 97% that we saw throughout the September of last year. Average age of mileage, as you'd expect, with the shortage of vehicles, has continued to rise. But yeah, it's quite you're probably expecting it with that supply and demand in balance generally across the market, and what Devon has been talking about there in terms of strength of the values and what he's seeing across all sectors now. And I mean, he cited MPV, didn't he, in the chat there, and where we've seen that growth. And I think was it £4,000 on the Safira increase?
Yeah. I mean, it's astonishing, really, because the whole MPV sector, buyers fell out of love with MPVs really when SUVs started to become popular, but they're popular once again. And a lot of this plays into, I guess, the sort of staycation, people wanting bigger cars for holidays, that sort of thing. And these are available, especially cars like the Safira.
Yeah, definitely. And we were chatting before the show, and I started a bit of a chat on social media this week, on one evening this week, that around the reg or tactical registration activity in the last few days of September, which was, in a way, you'd probably see pre-reg as a bit of a negative normally, but I think at the minute it's quite a positive thing that there has been a little bit of pre-reg activity in the market that generates some cars ready for sale now, which may not have normally happened.
Yeah, I mean, it's been some months since we last mentioned pre-registrations, but I mean, there are cars out there that have been ordered, are in the system, in lots that haven't been sold yet, and we're just starting really to hear about them, and these are going to be coming through as used cars.
Yeah, and I think to be clear, we're not talking about the significant volumes that we've seen in previous years when we were talking, the significant rise in a normal September that you might see, in the late sort of 80s, 90,000 pre-reg in the last 3 days of a month of September. What we're talking about here is that there are vehicles in certain brands, not all brands, that maybe not the right models, colour combinations, spec, that a new car buyer wants. And what we've sort of heard and seen is that, we're starting to see where some of the significant month of September and a significant quarter being the end of the third quarter, I've looked and probably thought, you know what, these vehicles are sat there, they're not getting the demand, they're in the pipeline, people are not ordering them, tax them, get them on the forecourts with a registration number on, show a little bit of a saving against new, and the customer can have the car immediately. So if you were a new car buyer and you went in and you were having a conversation where that new car is maybe a 6 or 8 month lead time, but actually there's one there, maybe not in the right colour that you wanted, maybe not with the right specification that you want, but you can have it there and then and take it home with you. And I think that's a positive for the sector.
So you're listening to All the Chatter That Matters on Motor Trade Radio, brought to you in association with eBay Motors Group. This is your weekly one-stop shop for all the biggest car retailing headlines from across the media, available on demand wherever you are on your podcast feed. So we'll head over to Motor Trader for the next story, and the headline there is Prestige Car Buyers Most Likely to Find Dealers Through Brand Website. So this is some research carried out by Judge Service, and I worked with the guys at Judge Service on this, and it's an interesting one because I haven't actually seen any stats before on how influential car maker websites are in that car buying journey that we talk about. So what Judge Service did was that they polled the views of just over 73,000 buyers, and they've identified what role there is. And it seems that car manufacturer websites, in terms of that buying journey, the prestige brands score a lot higher than any of the other brands. So Audi actually tops it. So 12.8% of customers within this survey said that who ended up buying an Audi started that journey on Audi's website, and the German brands score very highly in this. So the next one up is BMW at 12%, Minis at 11.4%, Volkswagen at 10.9%, followed by Volvo and Mercedes and Jaguar. So they are the strongest performers within this ranking, and you can see how it drops down with some of the volume of brands which scored very lowly. Taking Ford, for example, so customers who ended up buying a Ford vehicle, only 4.4% of them started with the brand's website. So I think we can infer from this that these buyers typically come from marketplace websites and dealer websites rather than the OEM website.
Yeah, and like you say, I mean, looking at those German brands and Volvo in there and Jaguar in there as well, I think you're right. I mean, they do a lot of marketing, don't they? They do a lot of that consumer marketing, drive traffic to their website, as some of the other mainstream manufacturers do as well. But it is interesting because I think now, go back many years, and you may have seen this. When you talk to a dealer, there's an area that the dealer focuses on with their marketing, and an area where the manufacturer focuses on. But I think that now is becoming a lot more blurred, isn't it, between the two now, and it's a joint effort now of this consumer marketing to drive traffic. And there is some advice there, I think, at the end there from Neil, isn't there, that he's talking about to the dealers.
Yeah, so he says our advice to all dealers, even those representing prestige brands, is not to depend on the websites run by their manufacturer partners. He says nearly a third of all buyers said they found the car they eventually bought on a website, highlighting the importance of online marketplaces, while over a quarter had bought after first visiting dealer websites. So it really is sort of underlining the importance of those marketplaces and dealer websites. And you're right in what you say, Phil, because I do remember when these big flashy websites were launched by some of the car manufacturers, and they were very sort of insular. That they were just talking about the product, the spec, but not necessarily how to buy it. They have evolved since then. So if you do go onto one of these websites, there's a clear path to a dealer.
Definitely. So we've got our final story before we head over to Steve Whitten from Menable there. And this is that Sytner sails through COVID storm to post dramatically increased pre-tax profits of 100 million. And I'm sure Darren would be pretty pleased with that result, won't he? I think for the business.
I think it will. And Darren Edwards, Chief Exec of Sytner, he's a regular listener, so he's probably having his breakfast whilst listening to this. So, definitely a good result there. So despite showrooms being shut for large parts of the year, the group increased profitability on 2019 with pre-tax profits of £71.8 million. Turnover for the business dropped nearly 17%, down from 5.9 billion in 2019 to 4.9 billion in 2020, which is what we've seen in a number of the big car dealer group results that we've reported on in recent weeks and months, that turnover is down, but the profitability is has increased, and that's really on the back of better margins, especially, going back to used cars, especially in used cars.
Yeah, and they do talk further down in the story that it's said that in the report that it sold 21.6% fewer new cars in 2020 compared to the year before, down to 16,542, while used car sales also fell by 13.6%, and that was down to 21,634. But the total new and used car sales for the overall group are not published. So interesting there, and that was obviously looking at the Sytner Group, which is a subsidiary of Sytner Limited. But obviously then looking into the interim dividend of 50 million was paid in 2020. So I think Darren does sort of cite the dedication and hard work of the teams there, and whether that's going across the Sytner Group colleagues and including the Ag News and Car Shop, and saying that they've worked together and delivered their group to the delight of the stakeholders of the business. So a great result there, and again in line with many of the other AM100 figures that have been announced recently.
We're delighted to be joined today for a chat with friend of the podcast, Steve Whitten from Menable, who's here to talk about National Inclusion Week and why it's important for motor trade businesses. So welcome back, Steve.
Oh, thanks, guys. It's absolutely great to be back.
So hi, Steve, and again, echo that with Curtis. Welcome back. So just say there, we were keen to get you back on the show to talk through what National Inclusion Week has meant for you and the team of at Menable. But first, all we can tell us a little bit about the event, and which is now in its 9th year, and this year it's themed around unity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think isn't it typical that we have these kind of focus type weeks that draw our attention, shine a light on these issues. And I think this year is particularly poignant because it comes at what we hope is the back end of the pandemic. He says with his, forever optimistic. But also, there's a lot gone on in the last year, 18 months with, the death of George Floyd and, various sort of things that have drawn attention to what's going on in the wider world. So I think for us, we at the beginning of Menable, we were kind of questioned as to, well, is it just for men? And it became very evident, very clearly and very quickly that, no, it's not. It's about an inclusive working environment across the industry. So this week to shine a light on inclusion, means a lot to us because it's all part of the whole mental health journey, which I'm sure we'll talk about as we go through this.
And Steve, how would you describe inclusion in the automotive sector? I'm aware of formalised HR programs that have been introduced in some of the bigger dealer groups, certainly over recent years, and I've talked to some of those groups about it. But are these the exception now, or are they increasingly becoming the rule?
I'm seeing more and more of those crop up, I have to say, in our conversations with businesses across the sector, particularly dealers. And as you say, the dealer groups are doing some great work around that. But how I would describe inclusion in the sector is I think we have a legacy of a sort of stereotypical masculinity.
Yeah.
And, and I think that's been a bit of a barrier to inclusion, if I'm honest, because we're target driven, we're objective driven, and when you have this sort of stereotypical view of how things should be done, it's very easy and very tempting to recruit in our own likeness. And I think that perhaps, and again, if you think about the mental health angle on it, there's a lot of insecurity and a lot of lack of confidence, I think, across the industry as a whole in many areas, and I think that can have a tendency to cause us to recruit someone into a position that we think might be the lowest risk. And of course, our default position as a human being is a low risk is going to be somebody who's just like me.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's an interesting point, Steve, because I was talking to a dealer group probably 2-3 months ago, and they identified that women typically like buying from women, yet this dealer group had very few women salespeople on their payroll. And they, as a result of that, they were actively targeting increasing their recruitment of women for sales positions.
Well, I think that's brilliant. I mean, I think that's also then links back to why there's a connection with this and mental health, because, along with that stereotypical masculinity, if you like, there's also been this sort of stereotypical amount of hours that people work and the amount of effort that people put in, and the sort of the picture of what the role in a dealership looks like. And I think, the work around inclusion isn't just about gender or ethnicity. It's also about making those roles inclusive for people who perhaps don't want to work to that usual model of 50, 60, 70 hour weeks, and therefore I think as a result it will probably make the industry a lot more attractive to people who may be in a position where actually they'd love to be in car sales but can only do a 3-day week, for example.
Yeah.
Or do you see where I'm going with that? Because
yeah, definitely. And with the pandemic and the lockdowns, people working from home, do you think that will actually change now? And employers in our industry, especially amongst dealer groups, they'll be more flexible in the terms that they roll out for employees. So definitely new employees coming in who maybe just can't commit to those sort of hours, but still want a job.
Well, do you know what? I think I would absolutely say I think it's changing already. And I'm speaking to more and more people who, are quite liking working from home or working in a slightly different way. And I think the industry, to some extent, is almost going to have its hand forced to make some changes. And as I said, inclusivity is not just about gender and ethnicity or whatever. It's also about saying, no, actually we can get the job done by having people working from home, or having them only come in a couple of days a week, or having them work in a completely different way, alongside the legacy of how we've worked. Your showroom does not need to be stocked with people who sit there diligently 8 till 6 every day of the week. And I think it's those kind of things that are going to, once we start thinking about that's going to help with inclusion, I think.
And I mean, you mentioned earlier about obviously the pandemic, and we know that on Thursday of this week we've seen the end of the furlough support and other support that are being implemented by the UK government throughout the pandemic for the last sort of 18 months. What impact do you think? I mean, we're talking about inclusion, we're talking about, mental health, and you just mentioned there about that sort of, and Curtis about that new behaviours from working from home and flexi time, things like that. And what should the employees start to be thinking about as we see the end of this 18-month period of people being in either working very differently hours or not at all, being supported through the furlough scheme?
Yeah, I think, again, this is another thing that's just going to shine a light on, sort of traditional working practices. With Menable, we've been very clear from the beginning that yes, it's about mental health, but it's actually about shining a light on culture and working practice. And I think, again, the end of the furlough scheme is certainly going to make employers think about the structure that they have within their business, but it's actually making employees think about it as well. And I mean, we are hearing stories of sales execs that are leaving the industry because actually they don't want to work those kind of hours anymore. They don't want to be doing the kind of things that we were doing pre-pandemic. And if they're not fully committed to the trade, which some people obviously believe that they are, many of us clearly are, it's very tempting to go, hang on a minute, I can go and drive a truck. I mean, I'll get the sound of that. Or do different types of work completely. So, I think it's, the whole thing's shone a spotlight on all of it for everyone, if I'm honest, and employees are now just as likely to question what they're doing and what direction they're heading.
And finally, Steve, National Inclusion Week, it actually ends on Sunday, but like most of these national awareness days and weeks, the themes need to be part of our everyday working lives, don't they? So what best practice tips have you for listeners listening to this?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right in terms of, these national and international weeks and days come along and they shine a light on it sort of temporarily. And I think this one in particular should now make us all start to think, this is the route we're heading, and we all need to work together to make our industry more attractive, more inclusive, more diverse. And in all of that, I think it's exciting. I really do genuinely think it's exciting. And I would say that my top tip is, and people, the old days when I was doing this in a classroom in front of people, I would have put 4 words on a flip chart, and at the top of it would be targets, and then underneath that would be strategy, and underneath that would be people, and underneath that would be customer experience. And I think the industry typically does things in that order.
Yeah.
It starts with targets. Let's work out what the strategy is to get there. Let's employ the right people, or in inverted commas, right people, and that will deliver customer experience. And I think for me, my biggest tip would be turn that on its head, completely turn it on its head. Start with customer experience. What do your customers want?
Yeah.
What's the model in the world that they live in? Then use that to decide, well, what are the best people to deliver that? And if it's some of the people like we've described, a back to work mum, for example, who can only do 3 days a week, she might be fantastic at the job. Let's not do stuff that's typically what we've always done. Put that together with your strategy, and I genuinely do believe the targets will take care of themselves.
Yeah, no, I think there is a lot going on. We know that we too speak about this a lot on the podcast with the sort of strategies from some of the retailers now. We've got the 30% club, and there's the Women in Drive and things like this. So there's lots going on in the sector. But as you say, there's always more that can be done, and probably keeping this as a culture, and as you say, maybe putting people first and customers first, and then your targets and strategy around that is probably where we are going to see different working behaviours, different working patterns, and employees thinking differently about their work-life balance as we as we come out of this pandemic. But as always, Steve, it's been a pleasure having you on and sharing your thoughts on how inclusion can be improved in the industry and connected to mental health and well-being of our sector. And if listeners want to reach out to you, and what's the best way to do that and to get in touch?
Yeah, as always, it's menable.org is the website. They can get in touch directly through that, even book a time to have a chat if they want. Or they can connect with me on social media, because I don't know if you noticed, but I'm on LinkedIn quite a bit.
Are you really, Steve?
Never seen it. I better look it up.
Not.
I've been enjoying your vlogs this week,
yes.
Steve.
Yes.
They've been great.
Yeah, I did get quite emotional on the one that I did yesterday, I think. So anyway, I'm on the Stephen J. Whitten on LinkedIn.
Fantastic.
So anyone can contact me on that. And as always, it's an absolute pleasure talking with you guys. So thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it.
Brilliant. Many thanks, Steve. It's great to have you back in our virtual studio as well. So, anyway, you're back next week with one of your Menable moments. So until then, many thanks, and catch up with you next week.
See you
All
soon,
right, take
Steve.
care. All the best.
Right.
See you soon.
So there we have Steve doing a sort of a bit of a roundup there, talking about obviously the National Inclusion Week that not maybe everybody has picked up on in that has taken place, but and what that means to the sort of connection between that and mental health, and giving some advice around this sort of, is it return to normality? I'm not sure it is. Is it, Curtis? I don't know if you can refer to. Is there a new normal? Is it normal? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm probably like you. I've forgotten what normal's like, so I'll take anything at the moment. But no, some as ever, some thought-provoking comments there from Steve, and do get in touch with him on LinkedIn if you want to follow what Menable are doing.
Definitely. So a busy show there. We've tried getting quite a bit of the bigger headlines in this week, but as always, head over to the trade medias that do publish a lot of these headlines and look for these exclusives and things like that. Don't forget to check out the eBay Motors report as well when it becomes available. Some very interesting data and results there that'll might just give you that little bit of insight to think about your stock profiling and what's happening in your business. And busy headline there, and do head over to the Derwin interview.
Yeah, well, Phil, that was an incredibly busy show. I think we've covered a lot of ground. I'm going to go and lie down in a darkened room in a minute.
Be all right.
Yeah, so unfortunately that's all for now. You've been listening to the weekly Motor Trade Radio podcast, brought to you in association with eBay Motors Group. Many thanks for joining us today for all the chatter that matters. Do check out our interview with CAP HBI's Darren Martin on your podcast feed. Phil and I are back again next weekend with our take on what's happening in the car retailing sector. Until then, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.